It appeals more to the guys, I think, right now.
I mean,
Kara was cool, but it has the man cave feel.
Yeah, quasi-industrial. Yeah.
That's right. But we are trying to, with Search and Rescue and the podcast, I'm trying to chase down as many fire, police, and military leaders that I can, and truly be able to interview and figure out more about leadership and talk to me about your perspectives and what are some of the complexities involved. And because we go back a little bit since you moved to Tucson, because we were working in some similar leadership circles,
right?
I got to hear your story a couple of times, and I really appreciated how you present yourself and
thank you.
And how you lead. And so I thought you would be a great candidate to come on here and just have a chat. So.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm flattered to be here, honored to be a part of this, and happy to talk.
And you got a great radio voice.
Oh, well, thank you. I had a part-time gig in radio a long time ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Truth comes out. No wonder. No wonder you feel so good.
Yeah. Yep.
But you're not from here.
No, I'm not.
Right?
No, I'm not.
So maybe start off with where you started and how you ended up getting to Tucson.
Sure. It's I'm originally from upstate New York, from Albany, New York, born and raised there, went to college there, and then kind of flew the coop. I'd been there my entire adult life till that point. Went to law school, actually, at Pepperdine University. So I went all the way from Albany, New York to Malibu, California. I couldn't have gone any farther, I don't think.
Culture shock, I bet, right?
Yeah, and an appreciated one, actually. I mean, I love my home city, but it was time for a change, And wound up from there back in Denver, Colorado. I got hired by a law firm in Denver, worked there for a few years, and then got recruited. This is back in the 80s. Late 80s, early 90s, recruited by a law firm in Washington, D.C. that I'd happened to be co-counsel with a case on, and wound up moving back east. And so wound up in the D.C. area, practiced law there full-time for a little while, and then decided that was not for me anymore. And I was living in Northern Virginia, in Fairfax County, and my next-door neighbor happened to be a fire captain with Fairfax County Fire and Rescue. And he said we used to hang out, and he'd listen to his stories and whatnot. And I thought, man, that's a much more exciting life than I've got as a litigator, So, and he said to me, I think you'd be good in the fire department. And I was like, I might just give that a try. And now 30 years later, here I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
So quite a career change. And so I'd imagine, first off, you're in Pepperdine, you're in this beautiful campus, you're going to law school, you kind of think you have your life all planned out. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it was more than just a story or two, but there was probably, I'm assuming, a lack of, something must have been missing in being in law.
Yeah. The practice of law, so I was working with a firm that specialized in aviation litigation. So we worked with airport authorities, aircraft manufacturers, airlines, primarily in tort litigation. So personal injury, wrongful death litigation, product liability defense. It was all on the defense side of the house. And I got to meet some really cool people, got to see and do some really cool stuff. But litigation, it's like fire shows on TV, right? Like our world is not Chicago Fire, right?
Don't tell anybody.
Well, it's and the law world is not like L.A. Law or The Good Wife or anything like that.
It's not all in the courtroom, just gunslinging.
No, and I worked with some really amazing people. In fact, my prior boss, who I remain friends with to this day, you see him very frequently on especially the cable news channels. When there's an aviation accident, he's very well known in that field, and he was super supportive of me making this change. But I just found that it was routine. It was the same thing day after day, despite the underlying facts of any given case were pretty cool. It was rote, and it was. The billable hour is people live and die by the billable hour, and I just didn't see myself doing that forever. And I candidly got to a point where I was like, I'm going to go open a bait shop in the Bahamas or something, Not because I didn't like the people. I loved the people. The work was just not inspiring enough to me. Intellectually super stimulating, but after a while it was kind of the same thing over and over. So I wanted something different.
Yeah.
So I tell people, I didn't get disbarred. I actually still have my law licenses. They're inactive, but I chose to stop practicing law. I did. The cool thing about the fire department, as you know, right, is you work a shift schedule, right? So some guys and gals, they have, landscaping business and painters, and there's a whole wide variety of folks out there that do things. Not a lot of lawyers, although there are some. So the shift schedule allowed me to continue to work part-time, and I continued to do that right up until 2010.
And I bet you didn't have a lot of peers that were part-time lawyers.
No.
They were, because most of them, it's like a blue-collar profession. It attracts those types of folks for good reasons, and so they're good at landscape. I had a tile company for a while. I moved furniture on the side, so I didn't know any lawyers that were firefighters, so that's super cool. You'd probably be able to give a lot of good advice or perspective just because you're in a niche that nobody else is in.
Yeah, I think so. I think I've been able to help some people out. Just like you said, provide, not necessarily give them true legal advice, but provide some perspective when they're feeling a certain way about something, if that makes sense.
Right. So you changed careers. Now you're in the fire service.
Yep.
And Fairfax is a large organization, large district, county. And do they do both fire and medical and some of the things like you have out here? Yeah,
100%. It is a county-based fire department back there. I think they're up to roughly 40, 41, 42 stations, about 1,600 or so uniformed staff. It's a big operation.
So about double, you'd say, from Tucson?
About
roughly?
double, correct. Okay. Yeah, close to what, Phoenix, very similar in size to Phoenix. If you think of total population, type of service, size of force, all that, it's, very similar to that.
And so were you drawn to anyone, because there's a lot of routes you can go in the fire service. Were you more into medical? Were you more into engineering?
So I took every opportunity I could to promote. And since I got into the game a little bit late, I won't say I promoted super fast, but I didn't want to linger too long in any one place, because A, I didn't want to get bored with it, and B, I like the challenge of advancement. And candidly, at some point especially when I had the opportunity to start moving into supervisory roles, you work with people that you would be a better boss then, right? Sometimes,
yes.
That just happens. So
and sometimes that's the main motivator of well, if I'm working for this guy, then my life is on the line. Like, I don't want that. I want to have more control.
Yeah. So I did that, and it was a great career there, and I really enjoyed. I wish I had gone to paramedic school when I had the opportunity, because back then, we're talking 1993, 94, it was like a 6-month course. It was not
as super crash course.
Yeah. So and I just didn't. And that's the one thing I do tell folks today. If I had it to do over, I'd go to paramedic class much earlier in my career and get that and maintain it. So I focused more on the suppression side, and I really got into special operations. And I was a member. Fairfax has one of the 28 FEMA teams for urban search and rescue.
Oh, great.
So I applied for and got a position on the team and was part of Virginia Task Force 1 and USA 1, because Fairfax and LA County Fire are the only two USAR teams that are authorized to export from the U.S. to provide disaster assistance in foreign countries.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. It used to be Fairfax and Miami-Dade. Miami-Dade lost the contract with U.S. Agency for International Development, and Los Angeles County stepped in. And between Fairfax and L.A. County, have had it for well over a decade now.
Wow!
So I went that route, and that was it was a side gig basically within the fire department.
Yeah.
But it was pretty cool, and rose up parallel through the ranks within the task force to ultimately, when I separated from the task force, when I retired from Fairfax, I was a task force leader.
Awesome. And so did you go to any foreign countries? Did you guys get dispatched outside of the
Yeah,
U.S.?
Haiti, the Haiti earthquake, Nepal, a lot of hurricane deployments within the U.S. The interesting thing, I did, so yes, there were disaster deployments. We also did a lot of capacity building with other countries. So the international search and rescue community is governed through the United Nations, and it's the Office for the Coordination OCHA, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and so we. We're privileged here. We're lucky. We have it really well. And there's a lot of countries that are disaster prone, but really struggle. Not necessarily. They don't have the. It's not that they don't have the wherewithal to respond. It's that they don't have the structure, right? So we would do a lot of teaching and guidance and helping teams improve. Especially not the we call them the rock breakers, not the people on the pile, doing the actual search stuff. They had that down. It was more the command and control and coordination stuff. And so my passport book is pretty thick with stamps. I've been to some pretty. It was funny. I was talking with my wife about this. Reminiscing and talking about some cool places I've been and some places I've been that I'm like, okay, check. I never have to go back there,
Right.
But I've gotten to see parts of the world I would never, ever have otherwise gone to.
Yeah, and gotten to actually provide such a great service for a community that was hurting at that time.
Yeah, super rewarding work and lifelong friends around the globe, really, still to this day. Of course, staying in contact through what else but Facebook.
Of course. That'll get you anywhere.
That and WhatsApp, yeah.
Well, so you did you got to get a lot of experience doing foreign stuff, but you also had some experience in 9/11 because you guys Fairfax was intimately involved. And I like hearing your perspective of the call that day.
Yeah, that was wow. That's an interesting one. It's certainly a call of a career, of a lifetime in emergency services. One I wish we didn't have to do, right? But you play the hand you're dealt. So I was on duty that day. I was a lieutenant. I think I'd been promoted as a supervisor for just about a year. Working at a station in the central part of Fairfax County that bordered very close to bordering on Arlington County, where the Pentagon is. And, like everybody else watching the news that morning and seeing the events unfold in New York City, and then all of a sudden, wham, the Pentagon gets hit. And the closest fire department there, even though the Pentagon carries a Washington, D.C. address, it's in Virginia. It's in Arlington County, Virginia. And Arlington is a very geographically small county, but it's very dense in population. 10, 11 station fire department, and very vertical, a lot of high rises and stuff. And obviously the Pentagon and some other government installations. And so they basically dumped their entire fire department to the Pentagon immediately, right? Which there was still business as usual.
There's still emergencies, there's still fires, there's still life happening.
Yeah,
right?
So we wound up initially being dispatched as a fill company to cover, and then ultimately wound up at the Pentagon. So, drawn into that for 72 some odd hours.
So what's going through your mind as all of this is happening? Because I think, naturally as a first responder, you want to be at those events because you want to make a difference. And that's why we're called to do that. At the same time, it was different from me being in Tucson and hearing it and seeing it and watching it on TV and going being inspired for that. But then you get sucked into the actual call. So how are you leading then in that moment when you have the complexities of the emotions of what's happening, but you also have to get a job done and you have to lead your crew?
Yeah. It's it was interesting. I was lucky. My engineer had back there. The job was called technician, but the same thing. Very tenured employee, very tenured firefighter. Been on the job probably easily 18 to 20 years at that point. But I had two very junior members in the back one of whom I think might still have been a probationary firefighter or just very recently off probation. And so, it's my job to make sure they get home safely. That was really what was weighing on me more than anything else, because everything was so uncertain.
Right.
The one thing that was very certain was that a airliner had crashed into the Pentagon.
Right.
That was certain. A lot of injuries, a lot of fatalities, but everything else was extremely uncertain that day. And in fact, to the point where there was so much chaos, especially in the first few hours, that military flights nobody exactly knew where planes were, and they actually thought there were another airliner coming. And so they ordered everybody just basically to run, like take shelter somewhere. A couple of times that happened. And that sort of chaos, it settled down after the first probably 3 or 4 hours into a little more stable rhythm. But it was tense for those first couple of hours. It really was. Well,
and then from your perspective, a lot of people think of the initial call and like you go and you solve a problem and maybe it takes at the most an hour if it's fire or you're doing some overhaul or whatever. But you got 72 hours worth of how you continue this incident and how you manage it and how you pass it on to the other companies and how you feel like you're actually making progress and all of those things. I bet you that the international training, that really helps out with that too, right? Because you're managing incidents over a longer period of time.
Yeah. I wish I'd had it at the time because I was not yet on the team then. So, and we were there. They did a good job. When I say the command structure, once it got established, once things kind of fell into that battle rhythm, so to speak, they did a good job about cycling crews out, bringing fresh people in. And like I said, we went back to our original assignment, which was as a fill company in Arlington County, and then for like the next 2 days, it was almost like they forgot we were there because Arlington kept, understandably, they were cycling their people in, and then the urban search and rescue response took over. Once the fire was basically out, it became at that point a search and rescue. Specialized search and rescue mission, and the fire department itself sort of just not withdrew, but turned that work over to the professionals in that realm. So we were at that point managing a good chunk of Arlington County, and because of it was what made it really interesting, I thought, because the automatic aid system, there's an automatic aid system in Northern Virginia that is almost it's set up on the same system as the Phoenix Valley, but it wasn't in place at that point in time. So I can remember being at this Arlington firehouse. It was a Fairfax County engine company, and I believe it was either a Prince William County or Culpeper County. I mean, from somewhere south of us, medic truck in there, and we had no way to really talk to each other or, during calls. And, the usual assignment or complement of equipment that you would get for a fire call was not available. So we were running house fire calls with 2 engines and an ambulance, It's
and just figure it out.
Just figure it out. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was crazy for a few days there. It was good to get home and get some rest. I'll say that.
Well, and that was one of the huge takeaways with the whole 9/11 thing was we have to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah, that interoperability. Yep.
Yeah, not just fire to fire, but fire to police, fire to Port Authority. All of those were on different systems, and in an event like that, you don't want to wait until that event to go like, wow, this would have been a good idea.
Yeah. That was the eye opener for the National Capital Region, certainly that we had to do a much better job of collaborating with each other.
Yeah. So you're getting a lot of experience, field experience, and you also were a self-identified fast tracker.
Yeah.
and so was I. So I get it.
Yeah.
I get it that you get kind of a stigma, but it's more about that. For me, it was the curiosity of things. Like, how do things work, and how can I make a bigger impact?
Sure.
And usually those types of leaders are drawn by that. You want to know more and you want to be able to affect more. So you ended up, I think your last assignment in Fairfax was a deputy chief or assistant chief?
Assistant chief, yeah. So back, same thing, same structure as here, fire chief, assistant chief, and then deputy chief. I was promoted to assistant chief, and that was, I always say that's when my life in the fire department ended, right? Because I got moved into an administrative role. And that after being an operator for so long before that, even as a deputy chief, I was a shift, what we called a countywide shift commander. So I was the A shift, I was the B shift deputy chief for a while. Then I was the A shift deputy chief for a while, still working the 24-hour shift, having that operational control for 350 or so firefighters across the county. And then I got moved to special operations because of my work with the urban search and rescue team, which was my first 40-hour assignment, but it was still operational, right? And then a couple of years later, they reached out and said, "Hey, we'd like to promote you to assistant chief." And I was like, "Great," because our assistant chief of operations had just left to go be a fire chief somewhere else. And I thought, I'm getting the ops spot. Well, no, that's not how that worked out. The ops spot went to a very good friend of mine who is now he's now the fire chief in Charlotte, North Carolina.
That's right.
Yeah, Reggie Johnson,
Exactly.
Chief Johnson. Yeah, he's an amazing guy, an amazing chief officer.
Yeah, you brought him out here for a couple things, right?
Yep. And so I got put, and another assistant chief had retired right around the same time. So I got put into what was called personnel services. So HR, training. Oddly enough, the EMS division was within personnel services at that point in time. They moved it back to operations where it really belonged.
I bet they liked your law degree. It
depends who. It depends who you ask. Yeah, but that was great because I got to learn the business side of the fire department. A true. And I know a lot of firefighters bristle. They say we're not a business. Well, we are. I mean, the fire department is I always say it's a not-for-profit enterprise. It really is. We have a customer base. We have a budget. We have logistics. We have personnel, we have equipment. You're not supposed to go over your budget. I mean, it's all those things that a business is, right? Yeah. We just deliver an exceptional service.
Well, and it's not like every little firefighter growing up through the ranks has that training whatsoever.
Right.
And that's what I had always encountered is it's something you have to really sink your mitts into it and be all in. And you can, as much as you want to say, I don't care. I just want to respond to calls and not care. You need advocates that understand the business side of the fire service, or you're going down, or you're not going to get your legislation to pass. You're not going to get your budget to pass. You're not going to get the guys and gals in the field the tools and resources they need if you don't know that side of it.
Yeah, and you have to talk data, right? You have to talk. In this day and age, data is capital, and the fire service does an exceptionally good job and could do better with data. And I hate the term. I don't hate the term. I don't necessarily like the term data driven. I like data informed, right? Because you pick your battles, and when the data's on your side, you're going to win most of the time. If the data's not on your side, it's best to put that one on the back burner and focus on something else. But what doesn't work anymore is the babies are burning thing, like, oh my God, the world is coming to an end and we're not going to be able to run calls and this and that. And that has a lot of emotional appeal to us, to firefighters. The general public doesn't care. Right. I mean, it's not that they don't care. What they care about is that a fire truck shows up at some point with people who do the work, period. They don't know about national response time standards. We do a really good job at trying to educate them on that so that they become those informed voters who can persuade legislators and so on and so forth. But to just say like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling everywhere. I mean, people are numb to that now.
Exactly.
They really are.
It's just noise.
It's noise. And candidly, the 9/11 wave has long washed over the fire service in the United States. After about 10 years, unless it's in your face every day, like you're at the Pentagon working and you see the memorial, or you're working in New York City around the World Trade Center complex. most people, a generation has passed, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of, we say never forget, and those of us who remember never forget, but there's a lot of people don't even know about it now.
Yeah.
Or it's like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, when you use a mathematical perspective, you're like, okay, 2001, and my daughter was born in 2003, and she's now been in the Navy about 3 years. And so that whole generation that's starting to serve in the armed forces or fire, police, and military, just getting in, weren't even alive during that time.
Right.
And some of them, if it wasn't brought up in schools, they have a very limited knowledge of what even happened that day. And it just blow my mind, because you know just how crazy. And I'm sure that's how it is for like other things, right? That if we go to previous generations, and I don't understand Vietnam in the same way that like my father-in-law does, as an example. And that was a very intimate moment. So it's natural that it happens. But if we're not reinforcing our need to understand history, then it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yep, exactly right. Exactly right. And just think about it. General education is just that, general. There's no time to dwell on it in great detail. If somebody has an appetite for research and wants to learn more, the 9/11 Commission report's an amazing read, but most history classes in whatever level that's being taught at now, it's a 20-minute segment, and they're on to the next thing,
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So you're continuing to move up. You've done a great job at Fairfax. What made you want to come out to the desert?
My fire chief back there, John Butler, who's currently now the president of the International Association of Fire Chiefs.
That's right. He's been out as well.
Yeah.
Like I got to hang out with him for a while. He's a good dude.
John's a great guy. He and I. So I competed for the Fairfax County job twice. I really wanted that job. And he and I laugh because he always says I got the better end of the deal.
You by not getting
by not
the job.
getting it. Yeah, the best job I never got. I have nothing but love for that department. It was great to me for almost 26 straight years. But everything's about timing. The right place at the right time, and John was in the right place at the right time for that job, and he was the right person for it. The Tucson job came open, and there's executive search firms out there for fire chiefs, and they reached out to John to ask about me. John approached me and said, "Would you consider moving out west to be a fire chief?" And I said, "Sure, I'd consider it," because I was going to go in the drop back there. I was about to enter our drop. It was back there. It's a 3-year, not a 5-year or 7-year now, but it's a 3-year drop. And I was going to go in because I was almost at that point where I had maxed out, so I was almost working for free, but for the fact I had a county car, right? So, so I felt like I'd done what I could do there, and I talked. The city was using a search firm, and so I reached out to the consultant and said, "Hey, John Butler said you were asking about me. Tell me more about this Tucson gig, and." We talked, and the one caveat I had was that I wasn't going to be a show pony, right? Because a lot of departments do. Oh, we're doing a national search, and in fact, they're not. They
have their candidate.
They have their candidate, and they're doing it just to say they did it, right? Which is a little bit disingenuous. So I told the guy, I said, I'm in the catbird seat. I don't need to do this. I want to do this, but I'm not going to put myself and my family through it if it's all for naught. Like it's just for show. And he was like, "Nope, they're open to anybody." There were 2 internal candidates that applied as well, or that went through the process. But he was pretty adamant that the city manager was really looking for external talent at that point in time. So I said, "Okay, I'll throw my hat in the ring." And that was, that was April, May of 2019. Interviews were in June, and I was in a U-Haul the second week of September.
So that happened fast.
It did happen fast,
Wow.
yeah. They wanted, Mr. Ortega, the city manager, wanted to move quickly because there had been an interim fire chief, one of the assistant chiefs, Joe Galata, great guy. Joe had been interim for about 18 months, and I think the city manager was just looking for the right time to run the process. And Joe did a great job. we're good friends to this day. He helped me immensely with the transition and was a good hand up until the day he retired.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about your experience once you arrived at Tucson.
Okay.
And see here, that background music.
Yeah, that's the hook.
That's how they give me a cue. And stay tuned after this quick break, and we'll hear more about your job as a Tucson Fire Chief.
Sounds good.
Discover the power of 88 Crime, where your anonymous tips are rewarded with cash. When you call in anonymously with a tip, you are given a code. With the code and a password, you can walk into a bank and redeem your reward anonymously. If your anonymous tip results in a felony arrest, you can claim up to $2,500 cash reward. Let's stop the silence on crime and strive for a safer community. For more information, please visit 88crime.org or call 88crime.
Copper Creek Cookies, Copper Creek Cookies, CopperCreekCookies.net.
We can print anything on our soft vanilla logo cookies. We deliver them and other sweet treats locally. We are located at 4249 West Ina Road, Suite 121. Call us 520-300-1131. We bake smiles.
Copper Creek Cookies, Copper Creek Cookies, CopperCreekCookies.net.
Are you looking to establish a powerful online presence for your brand? Look no further than Live the Dream Media. Our team of experts possess the capabilities and skills necessary to make it happen. From creating compelling content to analyzing data and making strategic decisions, we've got it covered. Don't let a lack of social media know-how hold you back. Visit ltdmedia.net for more information.
Welcome back to the Search and Rescue Podcast. Sorry, Chief, we had to pay a few bills.
Keep the lights on.
Quick, keep those lights on. You know, it gets warm in here with all the lighting, and that's why I wear a sweatshirt, though, because we're a little frugal.
There we go.
No, so we had just discussed what kind of drew you into coming into Tucson, and you'd been on the West Coast during college,
Yep.
but not in the desert.
No.
So a little bit of culture shock coming into the desert, or how, when you look at the cultures of the two organizations and West Coast to East Coast, what were some of the nuances there?
So a couple of things. I did, if you're going to make a jump and go to another department somewhere far away from everything you've known, you got to do your research, right? So I did research on Tucson. I looked into it. I had people ask me about, do you like snakes? And are you worried about scorpions? I'm like,
the standard desert questions.
You know how hot it gets there? I'm like, yes, I know it gets hot. But people forget, like, Washington, D.C. is a swamp, right? So it's built on fill land, and it gets really hot and humid there in the summer months too. So this is actually, people laugh, we say it's a dry heat. It's like a convection oven, but you know what? I'll take it over being, you step out of the shower and immediately begin to perspire just because of the humidity. So
for sure.
So that part, the life change part of it was not. I always say I'm kind of a chameleon, right? I feel like I can live anywhere. Certainly, my family is somewhat dispersed. My mom is still alive in New York, but I've got a sister that lives very close to her and helps with her care. But I've got a sister in Hawaii. My kids live in different states. So we're kind of all over,
Sure.
So that part wasn't hard. Culturally, department-wise, very similar operationally. The department is very similar operationally. Tucson, the City of Tucson Fire Department definitely operates much more like an East Coast fire department than a lot of other Western fire departments, right? And I think some of that is, just the history of being around since 1881, right? And the interesting thing here in southern Arizona, in Pima County, is that you got to go 90 miles to get to the next major city, right? Where I came from, there was Fairfax County, Arlington County, Prince William County, Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, Maryland. I mean, well over 1.5 million people in a very compact area. I mean, Fairfax County alone has 1.2 million residents, full-time residents, so just by itself. So super busy area. Again, more akin to what you see up in the Phoenix Valley, right, with all the cities surrounding the city of Phoenix. So what I the culture here, a lot of pride, a lot of tradition, and that's why I say it's very much like an East Coast fire department, because a lot of the West is new, right? But I see a lot of like Pittsburgh and Boston and Baltimore in Tucson fire, if that makes sense.
That's
right?
interesting.
Yeah, really tradition bound, and in a good way. Sometimes tradition can anchor you a little bit, and you have to kind of shine the light on some things and change some things. But tradition is valuable. It's good. It's a good learning tool, and so I really appreciated that. Right, there's a lot of love and pride in the department for the department. So that was good. Operationally, like I said, very, very similar operationally, so that made an easy transition. What was different was, or is, the funding.
Okay.
So
it's funded differently?
It is funded differently.
Okay.
So back east, at least in Virginia, county fire departments and the county form of government back there is much more prevalent, if that makes sense. So county fire departments, county police departments. There aren't nearly as many incorporated cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia as there are here.
Oh, okay.
So, and the ones that are tend to be somewhat smaller. I'm not even sure what the largest city in Virginia is. It's probably Richmond or maybe the city of Virginia Beach. But even their fire departments are limited in size because the geographic boundaries of the city are small. So county fire departments are funded through property tax, much like fire districts are here in Arizona. It tends to be a much more stable funding stream. A city fire department and the city of Tucson is funded through, general fund, right? Sales tax, which is where the majority of the city's money comes from is sales tax and other sort of ancillary taxes. And that can ebb and flow with the economy. Property values, the nice thing about the DC area, the National Capital Region, it's not recession proof, but it's recession resistant. So even though we got hit hard in the Great Recession of 2008, 2007 through 2007 to 2009 timeframe, we didn't have to close firehouses. We didn't lay anybody off. We didn't reduce service. We all felt the sting. We didn't get pay raises for several years, but nobody lost their jobs. No services were cut back. No units were taken out, decommissioned, that sort of thing.
Because you weren't overly reliant on people having discretionary income or enough to spend in their community.
Yeah, and property values there are fairly high. As they are here too, but they stayed high even through the mortgage bubble, the mortgage crisis. So we weathered that. Here, navigating with 14 other city directors, all kind of angling for our piece of the pie, so to speak, to deliver the quality of service that a city, the 33rd largest city in the United States, deserves, is challenging. And thankfully, we have our executive leadership team in the city has I would say a very good working cohesiveness among all the directors. The police chief and I are very good friends and professional colleagues, as is the public safety communications director, Sharon McDonough, who used to be with Tucson Fire and then ascended to a directorship job there. So the three of us work very collaboratively and with the city manager's office to, we advocate for our people, and sometimes those are difficult conversations. But again, that's my job as the fire chief, is to be the advocate, to walk out. I call it, you got to walk out in traffic for your people sometimes. And if that means having hard conversations, you have respectful but hard conversations about what's right and what's protected by the city charter, and still trying to balance that with the insistence and the demands of the policymakers, the elected officials of the city, right? So, and that's a balancing act for any fire chief. And I have a good relationship with our mayor and council, but they also, I'm not hesitant to tell them what our needs are and where we need to go as an organization.
That's what you need to do as a fire chief.
Yes.
Right? So you're in the reporting structure. There's other people within a city that have some control and influence over your budget. But that doesn't mean you just a lot of it can be education based. Your elected officials didn't grow up in the fire service.
Correct.
A lot of times they don't know how these fire and police operations work.
100%.
So you need to be the educator.
Right, 100%. And they're getting pulled for one thing. The elected officials, each of them, so we have a mayor and 6 council members. Each of them have a platform, right? Each of them are passionate about that, and that's what got them elected. So they have to be true to their base, and I get that. What I try to do, what my job to do is really to show them, like that educational piece, because I get a lot of, oh, I didn't know you guys did that, or I didn't know you couldn't make that occur without X.
Right.
It's hard to get their time sometimes because they are pulled in a lot of different directions. But once you get them and you give them data, then it at least, I won't say it forces them, they have a choice to make, right? And they are the ultimate arbiters of how the taxpayers' money gets spent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that there is a lot of pressure, especially when you're not just using the emotions of something, but you're advocating for the guys and gals in the field and you're advocating based on facts.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you need in order to handle things. And then ultimately it's up to them. But at least what you're doing is you're giving them all the information.
Yeah.
And that's what we need from our public officials is to represent the people and their needs. And if they can listen to you and respond with logic and reason rather than political force and influence, then that's all you can really ask for.
That's all you can ask for. And we are accustomed to, especially in the past 20 to 25 years, I'd say, getting things immediately, right? Our news is, the 24-hour news cycle is a generation old now. And, somebody somewhere was watching the Taiwan earthquake last night live here, I'm sure of it. So there's that. And we want stuff and we want it now. And when you've had to wait for it a long time, you want it even faster than now.
Yes.
And that's just not the pace of government. Whether it should be, we can talk about all day long. But and I'd like for things to happen more quickly, but there is a process and you have to work within the process.
Right. You have to, as a fire chief, you have to play the long game sometimes.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't see. And because all of what you're describing is complex enough in having to balance all of these things. You're having to balance it in a brand new organization where you don't have these relationships established yet. And then you have the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's right when you hopped in, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So like I said, I was sworn in, I want to say it was like September 18th or 19th. And my first official day was September 30th of 2019. And March, 15th of 2020 is when whammo.
Yeah, you just start to get to know everybody. And here we go.
Yeah.
And a lot of unknowns, very similar to 9/11 in that regard of when you were responding to the Pentagon. It's like, well, all I really know is this. All I really know is it sounds like there's a virus that's pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's bad enough to be locking down the country. And other than that, you don't know anything because you still have to do your job and you're still having to sort through information as it comes in.
Right.
And you don't have these full-fledged established relationships yet.
Yeah. I will say this. So I was lucky. The men and women at Tucson Fire were extremely welcoming to me. Extremely welcoming.
Awesome.
And I couldn't, that undoubtedly made my transition here infinitely easier. They there were some of them that were eyeballing me like, who's this cat from the East Coast and what's he going to do to us kind of thing. Because there are fire chiefs that do that, right? They come into organizations and they flip the apple cart the day after they arrive. And I didn't do that, right? I told them I would take 90 to 100 days to kind of just settle in and get to know people. And my wife, so moving from Virginia, my wife was working in government contracting at the time, and her company asked her to stay for about 6 months to help train her replacement. So we were doing the back and forth thing. And so there were a lot of weeks and weekends where I was, in my apartment by myself, living like a, 50-something college student, very sparsely decorated place. And so I would get out on, evenings and weekends and go have dinner and lunch at the stations and just pop in and talk to people, And
Yeah, you had that freedom at that time period to do
absolutely. And so I was able to get a lot of that done pre-pandemic.
That's great.
Didn't get to meet everybody, still haven't gotten to meet everybody, but that was a good time. That worked out well overall. Yeah.
So talk to me about some of the similarities of managing an incident, because you have this international experience. You have this incident management is all about, as an operator, you're trying to make the best possible decision, get as much info as you can, make the best decision based on what you have, and then be able to pivot if it changes and you're just solve the problem.
Right.
Well, you weren't going to solve the pandemic by yourself, nor right away, but you had a responsibility into how do you run the organization, protect your people, still be responding to the calls. Did you have similar approaches to managing an incident, or how did you have to settle into the long game mentally to see what was happening?
One of the things I stopped doing was watching the evening news, and really talking to our medical director. Look, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a fire chief, and I think it's critical to surround yourself with smart people, good people who can give you sound advice. And we, at least internally, I think we did that. And I'm not saying externally it didn't occur, but my domain is the fire department, and you can only control your own domain. There's the sphere of influence and the sphere of concern, and I try to stay in the sphere of influence because I could be concerned about a lot of stuff and not do a damn thing about it. So, sorry, that might get bleeped. I don't know.
No, that's within the approved words, and we're not regulated by the FCC.
There is. Oh, okay.
So you're good.
So, just trying to get. And everything is changing truly. And you recall, almost on a weekly basis, even on a daily basis sometimes, do you isolate, do you not isolate? Is it 5 days? Is it 7 days? Is it 15 days? Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? It was constant. And we had, like every organization, I'm sure, people, there was the spectrum, right? People like, this is no big deal. There are people who are terrified of it, people with, family members who had serious medical issues that you didn't want to bring that stuff home, And so trying to balance everybody's expectations and make sure that they felt safe, they had the equipment and the training to run the calls. We pivoted to telemedicine as quickly as we could, reduced the number of people encountering a patient, all that stuff. And and so we just did the best we could with it. With the information that was at hand and changing every week.
So then how were you able to deal with some of those pressures? Because it's usually, the loudest voices aren't always the most right.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you got a lot of loud voices that were criticizing you from one end of the spectrum.
Sure.
And then a lot of loud from the completely other end. So how do you manage some of that and keep a steady course of not being influenced one way or another, but trying to stay to facts and logic and reason? How can we do this?
Yeah, a lot of communication. Listen. I have an open door policy. A lot of fire chiefs don't. It makes some of my senior staff bristle. They don't like the fact that a probationary firefighter can make an appointment and come talk to the fire chief. I'm okay with that. I'm good having conversations. I like diversity of opinion and thought, But at the end of the day, we all have a boss, and the boss decides the direction in which the ship is going, and you have an option to either sail on the ship or stand on the pier, but the ship is moving, right? So I would hear people out and say, okay, here's what we know and here's what we're doing, but I appreciate your viewpoint. I respect your viewpoint. It's not, and I had a lot of people, well, do you agree with this? Do you agree? Or it's not whether I agree with it or not. I hear you, you hear me, here we go.
Right.
And that's it. I didn't get into the push pull of, of any of it.
Well, and I think something that resonated with me that was a good perspective is when we're in some of these fire chief forums and you're talking about leadership and especially people don't realize just how political of a position something like fire chief is and how many political influences are around you. And I really appreciated that you're like, okay, so let's say I take that perspective. Let's say I just go hardline stance and say, no, this is what I believe in, sink or swim. Well, if it doesn't align with some of your bosses and influencers and they just say, well, okay, bye.
Yeah.
And then you're out of a job, you're out of any type of ability to influence at that level.
100%.
So I actually appreciated the perspective of, I may not even necessarily agree with this from a personal standpoint, but if I just get canned, then who's going to then somebody else is going to come in and create even more of an echo chamber, and then what are we solving information based on best information?
Yeah,
So
a fire chief has to know. You have to understand, and I would say this to any fire chief: you're the expendable one in the equation, 100%. Right? You're an at-will employee. I'm a contracted employee with the city of Tucson. And look, the city manager is not going to get fired over it, right? Like, he's my boss. The city manager is my boss. It's a strong city manager form of government in Tucson. And so if you think about it, any place, if you're delivering pizzas for Domino's and the Domino's owner says, don't drive 50 miles an hour in the 35 zone and you keep driving 50, you're not going to be working for Domino's much longer, So that's just the reality of it. And I did tell people very candidly, look, I moved, 2,300 miles across the country to help move this organization forward, be its next fire chief for the next foreseeable future, and move this organization forward. We're going to have bumps along the way. But if I just go up and, do the Nikita Khrushchev, pound my shoe on the table thing, well, me and my shoe are going to be showing the door. And they're going to get somebody in there who just saw that happen, who's just going to go, yes, sir, be a bobbling head for. So,
right.
And my boss is okay with respectful disagreement. But at the end of the day, again, he's the boss of the directors. The mayor and council is the boss of the city manager. And we just roll on. You just got to, if you want to be in charge of everything, then you have to own your own business. Yes. And that's it. And you get to make the rules then.
Yeah. I have since hopped out of government and I'm involved in my own business, but
it's good to be king.
But 100% agree with that. Is there are certain concessions you have to make, and I think what gets lost in all of this too is ultimately the power is on the people.
Yeah,
because if your elected officials are not representing you and your needs, they're going on their own whims. You can replace them. And so you don't have to be you can sit around and stomp your feet, but if your elected officials aren't doing what you want them to do, as you can hire and fire them through the vote.
Through the vote, yep.
And I think more emphasis should be paid attention to that. Like you can nitpick individuals that might have individual opinions, but you could say at the end of the day, if you want change in government, the people do the hiring and firing.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So get out there and vote.
Always vote. Can't complain if you don't vote.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you've had to navigate a lot of, and you've had to influence a lot of change. You've had to deal with some challenging things with COVID and the pandemic and everything else that's come up. What's next now, would you say, for Tucson? So we're coming out of that.
Yeah.
You're in budget season. Where do you see Tucson Fire going?
Hopefully growth. That's the plan. We're a little bit hamstrung right now for next fiscal year, which starts July 1st. So fiscal year 26 starts July 1. I'm sorry, fiscal year 25 starts July 1, 2024. FY 26 and 27 are going to be challenging for us if something doesn't change because of the flat tax here in Arizona. An unintended consequence of that, or maybe not, I don't know, But an unintended consequence is that incorporated cities and towns are going to lose massive amounts of state shared revenue because personal income tax and corporate income tax are now at a flat rate and lower than, and the collections are behind. They're lower than projected. And as I'm not an economist, but I'm told that they lag about 2 years. So that's why this coming fiscal year, we're good, and we may really be able to do some things. I want to bring some trucks back in service. Well, let me talk about the budget thing first. So the next 2 fiscal years look pretty bleak if everything stays the same right now. And when I say bleak, $27 million shortfall in FY26 and an even larger shortfall in FY27, and then it's supposed to kind of the dive is supposed to end and start to climb out of it if nothing changes. But for this coming year, I've put on the radar, and I will say, fire chiefs make decisions at the time they make them for the reasons that they do, right? I wasn't here. I can't unring the bell, I always say, on what happened BC before Chuck, right? And the city of Tucson had fire chiefs that took units out of service, decommissioned ladder companies, and it's a hindsight's always 20/20 vision, right? And so I'm not casting shade on them. I just kind of would love to know what the thought process was in a growing city with vertical growth, why you would decommission major resources and give up positions. So it is what it is, and you play the hand you're dealt. So I was dealt this hand.
And not all of that was a staffing issue at the time. It was an operational.
Yes, exactly. There were operational decisions, but positions were shed. I mean, Tucson Fire used to be around 700-ish commissioned staff. When I got here, there were 632 positions. I've since been able to increase them to 645, and we're actually hiring above our head count for the first time so that we can try to stay at least in step with attrition, if not get ahead of it a little bit. Because we generally know when people are going to leave, right?
Sure.
But then there's unanticipated departures. People are not staying in the job for the full 20 or 25 years anymore. So that said, to bring a ladder company back into service in the Midtown area, that's critically important. We really need to do something about the northwest side of the city. Our companies in that area are just getting crushed with call volume. I mean, we've got trucks running 16, 17 calls in a 24-hour period routinely. And that's just insane wear and tear, both on the men and women, the apparatus, and candidly, the public is not getting the best service there. Response times are the highest there, and it's the most population-dense part of the city with the highest call volume. So we really need to do something there. And so I've made that advocacy. And as you grow a department, right, you bring units in service, you add personnel. There's equipment costs, there's training costs, there's support staff that has to go along with that. So it's an expensive pitch that I've put out there of ongoing costs, but I'm optimistic we will be able to accomplish at least some of it in this coming fiscal year.
Okay.
But it's a long game.
Yeah.
It's a long game.
And the pie's only so big.
Exactly.
So are there any, because a lot of people don't know that as fire chiefs, you have fire chief associations, you're working with unions. There's a lot of political influence to help try to get funding other ways through bills and through different things. Are there any on the horizon that could help with something like this, or are you left to fight for your pie? Because that's a tough sell.
Yeah, it is a tough sell. There are opportunities for federal grants, the SAFER grants for staffing, AFG assistance to fire assistance to firefighter grants, AFG program. Of course, that gets chipped away at by Congress every year, but was reauthorized for this year. So there's opportunities out there. I'm not afraid to look at public-private partnerships for stuff. Back in my prior department, I used to joke that our training academy sometimes looked like a NASCAR facility because, this training prop sponsored by Home Depot, this training prop sponsored by And so there are private grant funds available too. So the more we can do through grants, because I don't want to leave money on the table. I don't believe in that. That's wasteful. So the more we can do with grants, the better off we'll be. But that, again, only goes so far. And there's a lot of people competing for them. So you really have to make a good data informed pitch to try to sell them on why you're the needy one, even as a major metropolitan fire department.
Yeah, why you're the neediest of the needy ones.
Yeah, right. When there's places in the U.S., and firefighters, I are one, right? But we if we don't get out and see what else is out there, you don't know how good you have it.
Right.
And having the good fortune to speak at national conferences, teach at the National Fire Academy. In fact, this afternoon, I'm going up to Globe to teach for the next 2 days at an officer seminar for San Carlos Apache and Globe and Mammoth.
Very cool.
And there's cities and towns out there running with 2-person engine companies and equipment that's 20 years old, and they're happy about it because they don't know what their next budget looks like.
Yeah.
Not saying we should be just settle, right? I don't believe in settling, but I think you have to have perspective.
Yes.
And just because the automatic window on your truck is broken for a day, it's not the end of the world, right?
Yes. We talked to Chief Riley and I talked about that. Is like the suffering is relative.
Yeah, suffering is relative. That's very, very true. And again, not saying we should settle for it. Doesn't make it okay, but it's like let's not make that the issue. That's not the hill to die on, as they say.
Right. Yeah. Well, in order to continue to do a job like this with all the complexities, I think you have to have a thick skin, and I think you also have to be. For me, it seems like you have to be a generally optimistic person.
Oh yeah.
And I have seen you through social media or different interactions. You seem to be optimistic.
I am.
To me. And does that come from your upbringing? Is that something that you've kind of evolved over time?
I think everybody has a choice to make every day, and you can choose to be, there's a lot to be miserable about. I just choose to be, I look for the bright side. I just do. I'm not saying, it's not Pollyanna. I know there's good days and bad days, but I remain optimistic. If I'm not optimistic, what am I telling my men and women?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And so, you as sometimes in a lot of cases, as the fire chief's attitude goes, so goes that of the organization.
Absolutely.
And if you have a fire chief who's a rock kicker and just an unhappy SOB, then you can expect your organization to operate the same way.
Right.
I like to walk into a room with a smile and, hey, I'm all about being vulnerable. I'm happy to talk about anything, and I think when you're willing to do that, that gives you reason for optimism. Mm-hmm. It really does. And even the bad days become good days ultimately. And it may take some time, but we'll get there.
Well, and if you're having a bad day, but you have built up, because you're an authentic person, so you've built up some of that trust with authenticity. And even if you're not 100% on your game, those are like social credits that have been like, oh, well, we know normally he's on his game. So if you're off a little bit, it's okay.
Yeah.
But you also, it can be very taxing as a leader to be up all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that gets missed is maintaining that. As much as you want to be optimistic, you also need outlets. And I was curious from like a mentorship standpoint, you have to be able to vent between closed doors sometimes or bounce something off that's a sticky situation. Do you have those types of people in your life that you have resources for?
100%. 100%. So here in Arizona, we have a very closely knit fire chiefs association. Every fire chief that I've encountered in the state has been nothing but perfectly gracious to me and welcoming. And there's a group of us that, in fact, usually on the first Monday of every month, we have a Teams meeting at like 7 p.m. and we just get on there and shoot the breeze, and talk about stuff. But I can pick up the phone and, I can call Chief Bradley in Northwest, or I can call Chief Gaylord up in Flagstaff or Chief Camelli in Mesa, anybody, mm-hmm. and talk. But what I find is really valuable for me is to talk to people some distance away, right? Mm-hmm. Who don't have rocks in their bag for Arizona, for Tucson, for whatever. and I tried to be as unbiased a view of the situation to them as I possibly can, and say, tell me, am I the crazy one, or what do you think? What if you were faced with this, how would you deal with it? XYZ. And I talked to fire chiefs back east, California chiefs. I know some chiefs in Canadian cities, and yeah, we can pick up the phone and talk to each other at any time, and I get those calls and I make those calls, and that's really the outlet for me. I did work with an executive coach for a little while, a gentleman who was a Fortune 500 executive. He's in California, great dude, but helped. But I didn't want to keep spending the money when talking to other fire chiefs is free. So,
yeah.
But he was great, and he really brought a lot of perspective because his background had nothing to do with the fire service, nothing at all. He's a consumer of the service, not an active deliverer of it. So it was good to get his perspective on stuff.
Yeah, you need both people that get it internally from that larger leadership perspective, but then also somebody that is just somebody that's good to talk to.
Yeah.
That'll give a perspective you haven't heard of before.
He would tell me, he said, look, I can't tell you as a fire chief what to do or how to do it, but he goes, my role is like a father confessor. And that's really how he helped me tremendously, actually, for a while. Yeah.
Oh, that's
and
so
we
cool.
still stay in touch, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what you have coming up is you have some challenges with funding in the next couple of years. And obviously we'll continue those discussions as to how we can help as an organization, because that's our job. We do a lot of behind the scenes work to help fire, police, and military. So obviously that's near and dear to my heart and our heart. So I want to be able to lead from that. So we'll have to keep in touch as to how we can help with that.
Absolutely.
But I want to leave it kind of up to you. Do you realize it's already been an hour?
Yeah, we've been talking for a bit. It's time flies.
Time flies when you're having good conversation.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make sure that if there was anything that you wanted to throw out for the city of Tucson, or from your perspective, or anything that we should hit. Yeah. That this is the platform.
I always believe in ending on a high note, right? Because it's easy to talk about, and it's important to talk about the challenges. But ending on a high note is important. And anybody listening to this, I want them to know that I firmly believe that the Tucson Fire Department is one of the finest fire departments in the country, in North America. We deliver exceptional service under difficult circumstances sometimes. The challenges we're facing are being faced by major cities across the United States. People forget Tucson is the 33rd largest city in the United States. We are a big city, even though it feels like a small town sometimes here. And we have those same urban challenges. And just, again, if you get out of the bubble and look, just drive to downtown Phoenix, and you're going to see homeless people, and you're going to see people struggling with substance abuse, and you're going to see encampments, and you're going to see violent crime. And so what I want people to know is that Tucson Fire will continue to deliver the service, the highest quality service, 24/7, no matter what challenge comes our way. And that's the important takeaway here. It's not doom and gloom, but we have opportunity, and we need to see some opportunity for growth to continue that excellent service.
Love it. Love it. See, still optimistic.
Absolutely.
And that is it's not just for show. You're an optimistic dude, and that's one of the many things I appreciate.
I don't like being unhappy. It's no fun.
Yeah, it's a miserable existence if you're
it is.
sad all the time. Yeah. So, Chief, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great.
Scott, thanks for having me. It's great to see you again.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon as the political season progresses and budget season progresses, and we're here to help you.
Sounds good.
So,
thanks.
Thank you to everybody, and we appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you all soon.